Dr. Elijah Moore, a renowned surgeon with an impeccable reputation, arrives at a new hospital for an important internship. Dressed in a white coat, serious, confident. He had no idea that he would be met with prejudiced looks. Nurses and junior doctors saw him and hastily handed him a mop, mistaking him for a janitor. Laughter and whispers filled the corridors. But later they had to apologize to the surgeon in shame. Dr. Elijah Moore had built his reputation on the brilliance of his hands, the clarity of his mind, and a lifetime of dedication to the art of surgery. That brisk autumn morning, with the sky a flat expanse of steely gray and a crisp breeze stirring the fallen leaves along the pavement, he stepped through the glass doors of the new hospital where he had been accepted for a prestigious and crucial internship. Clad in a pristine white coat that billowed ever so slightly with his measured stride, his expressions shone with quiet determination and an unspoken promise to heal. Having earned accolades at renowned institutions and holding a track record unmarred by error, he expected to be welcomed by colleagues who would recognize his worth, irrespective of any superficial preconceptions. As he walked down the immaculate corridors of St. Aurelius Medical Center, a place heralded for both cutting-edge treatments and exemplary service, Elijah's steady gaze swept over the busy scene. He noted the quiet efficiency of the nurses organizing charts, the brisk movement of junior doctors hurrying between patient rooms, and the soft hum of the hospital's intercom announcements. In his mind, he rehearsed the day's tasks and mentally prepared for the intricate cases he would soon face. Yet beneath his focus was an unspoken hope that in this new environment his expertise and genuine passion for the healing arts would finally speak for themselves. That hope, however, was about to be confronted by an unexpected and stinging dose of prejudice. Just inside the bustling main lobby, as he neared the reception area, a young nurse whose eyes quickly skimmed over his distinguished bearing did something that made his heart momentarily falter. Without a word of greeting or acknowledgement of his credentials, she reached out abruptly and handed him a mop, her eyes darting away as if embarrassed by the simple act. The assignment, as absurd as it was degrading, left him perplexed. A murmur spread among a small group of junior staff gathered near the reception desk. A series of barely concealed snickers and whispered comments. One listened comment, barely audible yet dripping with condescension, suggested that the new janitor would be expected to keep the floors spotless despite his impressive attire. Elijah paused, taking the mop in his hand with a grace that belied the inner tumult his dignity felt. Under his calm exterior, a storm of emotions surged. A deep-rooted hurt intermingled with a steely resolve. He watched, silently and thoughtfully, as the seemingly trivial object, a mop, became the symbol of a prejudice aimed directly at him. It was as though before he could even explain who he was, a renowned surgeon with years of study and countless saved lives, he was already being judged solely on the surface of his skin and the stereotypes that some held about him. In that charged moment, as eyes in the corridor flickered with a mixture of smug amusement and misguided superiority, there was a palpable silence that spoke louder than any words could have. For a full minute, the corridor seemed to stretch interminably, every soft shuffle of footsteps amplified 80-fold in the charged atmosphere. Some of the nearby staff, unable or unwilling to meet his eyes, began to exchange furtive glances and low whispers that hinted at gallows humor, while others looked on with expressions that oscillated between pity and thinly veiled amusement. Yet Elijah's eyes remained fixed ahead, deep and reflective. Every detail of his appearance, the immaculate cut of his white lab coat, his trimmed hair, the calm assurance in his stride, spoke of a man who had surmounted adversity countless times. And though the indignity of the gesture stung, he felt an inner strength rekindling, a promise that his actions, once he revealed the depth of his medical expertise, would erase the memory of this moment. In that silent heartbeat of injustice, Dr. Moore silently vowed that the next moments of the day would be defined not by the shallow ignorance of a few but by the life-altering potential of his skill. If only his next words and deeds could serve as the powerful antidote to prejudice, then this painful beginning would be transformed into an opportunity, a chance for every witness in that sterile, judgmental foyer to see not a janitor, but the empathetic, brilliant, and skilled surgeon he was truly meant to be. The moment Dr. Elijah Moore walked away from that degrading encounter, his hand still gripping the mop that was never meant for him. A silent storm raged in his heart, though his outward expression remained composed. A deep, imperturbable calm molded by years of rigorous training and countless trials. Inside, he was a tempest of righteous indignation and sorrow, the sordid label that had been carelessly slapped upon him, reducing his talent, expertise, and decades of hard-won accomplishments to that of an unseen janitor, cut deeper than any scalpel ever could. As he slowly made his way down the gleaming corridors of St. Aurelius Medical Center, Dr. Moore observed his surroundings with acute sensitivity. Every whisper, every furtive glance, and every hasty sidelong smile broadcasted his colleagues' prejudiced assumptions. He saw how the young nurse's trembling hands, when hastily handing him a mop, and then the disbelieving eyes of a nearby resident physician, spoke volumes about their bias. Rather than meet his gaze, they turned their eyes downward, as though his professional identity had dissolved into a mere stereotype right before their eyes. For him, the cold chatter in the hallways was more than idle gossip. It was a resounding echo of a society still steeped in superficial judgments and deep-rooted misconceptions. Dr. Moore recalled countless moments in his long and distinguished career where his skill as a surgeon had been indisputable. With steady hands and keen precision, he had conducted operations that saved lives in the flash of an emergency. He had faced down the unimaginable pain, bleeding, and the specter of death, with nothing but his unwavering resolve and brilliant mind. Yet now, in the sterile, indifferent light of the hospital corridor, his color and appearance were treated as much less than the sum of his invaluable abilities. Each dismissive laugh and each snicker that followed in his wake was a personal affront, an insult that resonated like the clanging of metal on metal in a silent theater of derision. Though anger bubbled inside him, Dr. Moore refused to let it overtake him. He took a deep, steadying breath and resolved to silently bear the weight of their ignorance. In the quiet recesses of his mind, he made a solemn vow. By the end of the day, everyone in this hospital would see the truth of who he truly was. A brilliant, compassionate, and accomplished surgeon whose dedication to saving lives surpassed any narrow-minded preconception. That inner promise pulsed through his veins, transforming the sting of humiliation into the fuel required to shine amidst adversity. As he continued onward, each step measured and deliberate, he allowed his focus to shift from the glaring injustice of the moment to a reflective, almost meditative state. He watched the indifferent hustle of hospital staff going about their routine tasks. In one corner, a group of junior doctors huddled together, whispering behind clipped hands and exchanged smirks. In another, nurses with furrowed brows and hurried steps neglected a fleeting apology or even a nod of acknowledgement. Dr. Moore's gaze filled with both quiet sadness and a resolute determination, not to retaliate with sharp words, but instead to let his professionalism and skill speak louder than their baseless assumptions. He recalled his first experiences in medical school, where he had been lauded not for the color of his skin but for the brilliant insights he brought to every case, the innovative techniques he proposed, and the calm assurance that instilled hope in even the most desperate situations. Those memories were a soothing antidote to the poison of the present moment. He understood that prejudice was an illness born out of ignorance, one that could only be cured by witnessing undeniable evidence of competence and heart. In this silent, lonely march through the hospital's pristine corridors, Dr. Moore's mind churned with a mixture of melancholy and fierce resolve. He was painfully aware that his very presence was a challenge to the status quo of those around him. The very fact that a distinguished surgeon should be mistaken for a janitor in his own field was an affront to decades of hard work and sacrifice. Yet, instead of wallowing in despair, he saw this bitterness as a call to action, a motivation to demonstrate his true capacity beyond even his own expectations. Every echo of his footsteps on the polished floor became a rhythmic promise that would soon silence the doubters. With each measured stride, he promised himself, "By the time you hear the sound of my scalpel and the precision of my hands in action, you will understand that I belong here, not as an invisible support, but as the very heartbeat of this institution." His internal monologue was a litany of commitment, a declaration that the talents within him would soon overpower the shallow judgments of his peers. Deep in his soul, Dr. Moore understood that today was not just another day shadowed by ignorance. It was the day he would transform that insult into a triumphant symphony of healing. Like a maestro preparing for a grand performance, he was gathering every ounce of talent, every fragment of compassionate expertise, readying himself for a moment when fate would call upon him to prove his true worth. In that determination lay not just his professional vindication, but the undeniable truth that sometimes the most powerful miracles begin in the quiet, unsung moments when a man stands tall, despite being seen only as a janitor. No sooner had Dr. Elijah Moore turned away from the corridor's incessant murmurs of derision than the piercing sound of a distress call shattered the fragile calm. In the distance, through the hospital's glass-paneled emergency entrance, flashing red and blue lights signaled an urgent arrival. The steady patter of rain seemed to quicken its rhythm, as if nature itself was now warning of the crisis to come. Moments later, a commotion erupted at the entrance as paramedics rushed inside, their faces lined with raw urgency and concern. In their arms lay a teenage boy, bleeding profusely and barely clinging to life, a victim of a terrible accident whose fate now balanced precariously on a knife's edge. The paramedics struggled to maintain control in the face of chaos. As they wheeled the injured youth down the corridor, each step was accompanied by hurried commands and desperate shouts. The previously smug and dismissive glances of the hospital staff evaporated, replaced by a palpable wave of panic and uncertainty. Nurses scanned the throng with widened eyes, and junior doctors huddled in small clusters, their confident demeanors replaced by shock. In the midst of this frantic flurry, one of the paramedics, his voice strained and laden with urgency, called out into the disarray, "We need immediate help. This boy is losing blood fast." In that turbulent moment, as the paramedic's cry sliced through the cacophony, an unexpected ripple of recognition surged in the room, a ripple that would soon transform cold prejudice into humbled admiration. Instinctively, the paramedic's gaze fell on the figure standing silently in the periphery, still clutching the mop that signified his recent, degrading misidentification. "You there, the janitor, get over here now," he barked, his tone frenzied with desperation. The words, though unintended as a malicious slight, were soaked in the shared terror of witnessing a life hang in the balance. In that instant, the masquerade of ignorance collapsed around Dr. Moore, exposing his true identity beneath the white coat he wore with unassailable pride. A hush fell over the gathered crowd as the paramedic, in a moment of sheer necessity, pleaded, "Please, we need someone who can operate. Someone who knows what to do." The room, once rife with dismissive whispers and derisive stares, held its collective breath. All eyes now converged on Dr. Moore, whose steely expression shifted into one of focused determination. Without a flicker of hesitation, he set the mop aside, a symbolic abandonment of the imposed identity, and strode purposefully toward the emergency bay. In that charged moment, every mocking smirk and every prejudiced glance was eclipsed by the breathtaking gravity of the unfolding crisis. The boy was transferred onto the operating table with frantic efficiency, his condition rapidly deteriorating under a torrent of blood and the relentless tick of the hospital clock. The once inadequate response from the earlier appointed team now gave way to a desperate search for any sign of competence, and the weight of expectation pressed heavily upon the air. Dr. Moore quickly donned surgical gloves and scrubbed in with the precision of a man who had honed his craft through years of life and death battles. With calm assurance and measured commands, he instructed the paramedics and nurses on immediate life-saving measures, his voice rising above the pandemonium with clarity and authority. "Stabilize his airway. Initiate blood transfusion immediately," he ordered, his tone leaving no room for hesitation or error. As he deftly examined the injured teen, his hands moved with the kind of practiced precision that only comes from countless hours in the operating room. Every incision, every suture, was a testament to the years of rigorous training and the unyielding commitment to saving lives that defined his character. His eyes, once burdened by the sting of earlier humiliation, now shone with a resolute focus, for here was the true measure of his worth, a worth that transcended any superficial judgment. For those gathered around, the transformation was nothing short of miraculous. The staff, who had moments before scorned him as an invisible janitor, now watched in awe as he skillfully mobilized the team, turning desperate chaos into a harmonious ballet of coordinated efforts. His steady hands, guided by deep knowledge and an unfaltering sense of duty, stemmed the bleeding, stabilized vital signs, and meticulously charted a course toward recovery. With every precise command, he erased the remnants of prejudice left echoing in the sterile hallways, converting doubtful whispers into an admiring silence. The seconds ticked by in a whirlwind of surgical urgency. The paramedics' earlier command echoed in the mind of every survivor in that corridor. True merit shines brightest in moments of crisis. As Dr. Moore's scalpel finally found its necessary mark, the room seemed to exhale collectively. A silent, relieved sigh that the tide was turning. In that fateful emergency, when life and death hung in a delicate balance, the hospital bore witness to the undeniable truth. The man before them was not a mere cleaner mistakenly assigned a tool he never should have held, but a gifted surgeon whose hands and heart could, in a matter of minutes, rewrite fate. In that pivotal instant, the true value of Dr. Elijah Moore was illuminated. The once prejudiced opinions, the shallow assumptions about his identity, were swept away by the stark reality of his brilliance and humanity. The hospital, gripped by the gravity of the moment, collectively recognized that compassion and skill are the true markers of a healer, qualities that no misguided bias could diminish. And so, as the injured teen's vital signs steadied and a murmur of hopeful relief spread through the room, every witness silently vowed to never again judge a man by the color of his skin or the clumsy error of a moment's mislabeling. In the emergency operating room, the frenetic energy of the past few minutes gradually coalesced into an intense focus that only a true professional could summon. As Dr. Elijah Moore entered the OR, his eyes immediately assessed the chaotic scene. The teenage boy lay on the operating table, pale and fighting for every precious heartbeat, while the surrounding team, now transformed from skeptical bystanders into desperate aides, watched in silent anticipation. The blaring overhead lights, the rhythmic beeping of monitors, and the hushed whispers of apprehension all receded as Dr. Moore's calm, resolute demeanor took charge. In that suspended moment, any remnant of prejudice was obliterated by his unwavering commitment to saving a life. Without a moment's hesitation, Dr. Moore directed the team with clear, concise commands. Nurse, please prepare the necessary instruments. Anesthesiologist, adjust his ventilator settings. I need full stability now. His voice, steady and imbued with undeniable authority, resonated through the room as if it carried the essence of every life-saving moment from his long career. Every movement he made was deliberate. His gloved hands moved with the precision of a master artist, quickly undoing the tension that had gripped the air. The surgical instruments were arrayed in perfect order on the stainless steel tray, reflecting the glints of the bright or light, and it was this orchestration of care that silently declared, without words, that here was a surgeon who was not merely fulfilling a duty, but redefining the very standards of excellence. As Dr. Moore began the critical incision, the room fell into an almost reverent silence, save for the steady hum of the machinery and the quiet, determined cadence of his heartbeat echoing in his ears. The procedure was complex. The boy had sustained severe injuries from a traumatic accident, and every second was vital. With extraordinary composure, Dr. Moore carefully navigated through layers of tissue, skillfully controlling unexpected bleeds and isolating the site of the damage, all while monitoring the patient's vital statistics with the unerring precision of someone who'd honed his craft over countless life and death moments. His actions spoke louder than any argument ever could. Every move was calculated, every command issued with an assurance that forced the room to take notice. Clamp here, steady. We're encountering more bleeding than projected. I need an extra pair of hands for suction now, he called out, his voice never rising above a calm murmur even as the situation intensified. The team sprang into action, their earlier doubts dissolving before the mastery displayed by the man in front of them. In those critical minutes, the operating room's atmosphere shifted from one of terse skepticism to one of unified determination, every member of the staff compelled by Dr. Moore's unwavering focus and deep well of experience. Outside the OR, Even those who had once exchanged derisive glances in the corridors now paused and listened to the unfolding crisis with rapt attention. The error of erroneously equating him with a mere cleaner was laid bare before everyone as he worked. The messenger of prejudice was silenced by an overwhelming demonstration of skill. As he sutured the final layers with delicate, deliberate strokes and sealed the incision with near-impeccable technique, the boy's vital signs steadied, and a collective sigh of relief swept through the room. Every face in the operating theater, from the scrub nurse to the seasoned anesthesiologist, bore expressions of awe and respect, a dramatic reversal from the sneers and sideway glances of moments earlier. Dr. Moore's artistry did not stop with his technical prowess. He paused ever so briefly to ensure that his instructions had been clearly understood by each team member, and to check that the trauma team's backup plan was ready should any unexpected turn arise. There was a dignity in his quiet, steadfast responses, a reflection of a man who had weathered storms of prejudice and emerged with a heart fiercely committed to the sanctity of human life. In the aftermath of the surgery, as he gently closed the final incision and directed the nurses to secure the surgical area, an almost palpable silence filled the OR. A silence charged with the realization that something profound had just taken place. In that moment, the hospital staff, once blinded by shallow assumptions, were forced into an undeniable confrontation with the truth. Dr. Elijah Moore was not an afterthought, nor was he a placeholder for menial work. He was a gifted surgeon whose competence had turned a near-tragic moment into a successful, life-preserving triumph. Every scale, every measured drop of blood, every whispered thank you from the attending team, and even the stunned breaths of onlookers confirmed that true professionalism is revealed not in titles or superficial appearances, but in the relentless commitment to healing and salvaging life when it hangs in the balance. In the tense aftermath of the emergency, as the operating room lights dimmed and the adrenaline of the crisis ebbed slowly, a profound silence fell over St. Aurelius Medical Center. In the corridors beyond the OR, the mood among the hospital staff was undergoing a dramatic transformation. The crew who once exchanged smirks and derisive whispers now wore expressions of astonishment, guilt, and even admiration. With the successful stabilization of the teenage patient, every beating moment had underscored one undeniable truth: that Dr. Elijah Moore was not the unremarkable janitor they had crudely assumed him to be, but a consummate surgeon with expertise that had saved a life when every second counted. Nurses who had once hurriedly passed him by now found themselves glancing his way with pensive looks. Some, their eyes downcast with remorse, silently reflected on the unjust assumption that had marred their first impression. Others, their voices softened by awe, would later exchange hushed conversations about how his steady hands and calm command in the operating room had seemed to erase every stereotype, replacing it with an incontrovertible demonstration of skill and compassion. Even the junior doctors, once so certain of their own budding careers, now wore expressions of quiet shame as they recalled the swallowed laughter and dismissive gestures that had filled the corridor's moments before the emergency arose. In the sterile break room where coffee machines sputtered against a backdrop of recycled air and cold linoleum floors, a small group of nurses gathered. Their conversation was tentative at first, low murmurs punctuated by long, reflective silences. "I can't believe we," one nurse whispered, the weight of guilt evident in her trembling tone. "We acted so thoughtlessly," another admitted, shaking her head as if to disperse years of ignorance with a single gesture. Their expressions spoke of internal battles, remorse for their superficial assumptions clashing with the newfound respect for the man whose every action had proven his unwavering competence. Dr. Moore, having stepped out of the OR to catch his breath and gather his thoughts, found himself the reluctant center of this transformation. His back remained straight, and his face retained a dignified calm, but even he could sense that the atmosphere was palpably different. As he passed by the nurses' station later that day, whispers of "Dr. Moore is incredible" mingled with polite nods of apology. One junior doctor, his voice barely above a whisper, approached him with an uncertain look in his eyes. Dr. Moore, I'm sorry about earlier. I was so wrong to assume." His words trailed off, choked by the embarrassment of having been a part of the prejudice that had defined the harsh morning. Dr. Moore offered a measured smile, not out of unearned pride, but as a gentle reassurance that his ability to heal transcended the narrow confines of judgment. "We all learn," he replied softly, his deep voice laced with empathy. "Sometimes it takes a crisis to remind us what truly matters." His words, simple yet profound, resonated deeply with everyone present. Even those who had been the harshest in their initial reactions found themselves reconsidering their own biases. Beyond the clinical walls, in the hospital cafeteria where the scent of freshly brewed coffee replaced antiseptic and the chatter of staff attempted to mask remorse, groups formed discussion circles around the morning's events. A senior nurse, whose eyes mirrored decades of experience and compassion, addressed her colleagues. "Prejudice is a disease that can rob us of our humanity. Look at what happened today. When a person's skills and dedication were put on full display, our shallow perceptions melted away. We owe it to ourselves and to our patients to see beyond the surface." Her words, earnest and raw, kindled a spark of introspection among those who had once been so quick to judge. As the day wore on, it became clear that the entire hospital was in the midst of a subtle yet significant metamorphosis. The initial sting of dismissive labels had given way to a quiet collective reassessment. Many staff members began to approach their work with a renewed sense of humility and responsibility. They understood that behind every white coat was a story, a lifetime of sleepless nights, and a commitment to humanity that could not be measured by superficial standards. Later that afternoon, during a routine staff meeting, a senior administrator cleared her throat and addressed the assembled team. "Today, we witnessed something extraordinary," she began, her voice steady and compassionate. "Let us remember that our roles in this hospital are not only defined by our titles, but by our dedication to every life that passes through these halls. We must learn from this incident and pledge to treat each colleague and each patient with the respect they deserve. Dr. Moore's performance today has taught us that true excellence knows no color, no rank, and no prejudice." Her words were met with solemn nods and a palpable silence of contrition. In that moment, the once rancorous whispers in the corridors transformed into an unspoken promise, a shared commitment to uphold the dignity of every individual, to see the brilliance in someone's character rather than fixate on trivial appearances. By the end of the day, as the hospital began to quiet down and night shifted in over the cityscape, a subtle change had taken hold. The skeptical eyes that once peered at Dr. Moore from a distance now looked upon him with respect and gratitude. The shallow bias that had marred the beginning of his first day in this institution had, within a matter of hours, given way to an awakened recognition of his true worth, a recognition that echoed in every whispered apology, every tentative handshake, and every exchange of genuine admiration. Once the final suture was placed and the surgical drapes were gently lifted from the operating table, a profound silence settled over the OR, a silence that spoke louder than the panicked cries of moments before. The steady beep of monitors continued its unwavering cadence, marking each heartbeat like a metronome of hope. In the recovery room just beyond the OR, the air was heavy with relief and quiet introspection. The teenage patient, once teetering on the brink of death, now lay stable, his color gradually returning, buoyed by the life-saving intervention. A gentle murmur of exhaled breaths mingled with the subdued chatter of the attending nurses as they began further assessments. Yet, amid that clinical calm, an emotional current surged silently. The healing work of Dr. Elijah Moore had not only stitched up a wound, but had also sewed together the very fabric of human worth. In a quiet corner of the recovery suite, the rescued family, whose anguish had once echoed in desperate calls outside the hospital, finally received word that the boy was stable. Marissa, still trembling from the ordeal and burdened by the ghosts of her past, clutched the hand of an elderly woman who had come to represent the boy's kin, a guardian appointed by the emergency services until family could be located. Tears welled unbidden in Marissa's eyes as relief broke over her like a tide. The soft, labored breaths of the young patient were interspersed with hushed exchanges among family members. One of them, a middle-aged man with faint lines of worry etched upon his face, reached for his phone with shaking hands. Soon, voices rose in grateful exclamations as he recounted that the boy's condition had stabilized due to the unfathomable expertise of a singular surgeon. The heartfelt expressions of gratitude expressed in that small circle, murmurs of "thank you, doctor," and "our miracle, he saved our son," felt like tiny exclamations of life rising again from the ashes of despair. Outside the recovery room, word of the successful emergency spread like a ripple through the corridors of St. Aurelius Medical Center. In the hospital's expansive waiting lounge, the atmosphere shifted palpably. The once dismissive glances and murmurs of earlier hours gave way to a respectful hush. Staff who had earlier worn expressions of condescension now exchanged quiet, remorseful looks. As the news filtered through every department, even the cold, clinical minds of those in charge could no longer hide behind indifference. It was then that the hospital's leadership, long accustomed to maintaining a distant, impersonal aura, called an impromptu press conference in the main auditorium. Under the bright, unyielding lights of that assembly space, the hospital director, Dr. Rosalind Carter, took the microphone. Her voice, steady yet laced with contrition, resonated through the hushed room as she began. "Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed colleagues and staff, today we witnessed a profound demonstration of true medical artistry. Our institution prides itself on excellence. Yet today we were forced to confront a regrettable truth. Bias, in its most superficial form, nearly marred what should have been a moment solely dedicated to the saving of a life. I extend my deepest apologies for the hurt and humiliation inflicted upon Dr. Elijah Moore. No person, and certainly not one of such proven talent, should ever be mistaken for anything less than the consummate professional he is." A ripple of murmurs swept across the room. Over the ensuing minutes, Dr. Carter detailed the investigation into the incident that had misidentified Dr. Moore during his arrival. She acknowledged that a few within the institution had let prejudice cloud their judgment, an admission that sent a shiver through the audience. "We regret that our hospital's standards of respect and dignity were compromised, even for a fleeting moment, and we assure you that corrective measures will be enacted immediately," she declared. Each word was met with solemn nods and a palpable sense of accountability hovering in the air. Back in the recovery area, as post-operative monitors continued to sing the quiet ode of life, the atmosphere was charged with both emotional release and introspection. Marissa, sitting on a narrow hospital chair with her eyes fixed on the closed door of the OR, let out a trembling, heartfelt sigh. One of the nurses approached her, offering a tissue and a gentle smile. In a voice thick with gratitude, she whispered, "Your son is going to have a future. He's been given a second chance, in large part because of Dr. Moore." That moment of raw vulnerability illustrated how, in the afterglow of crisis, even the most guarded hearts could open up to hope. Elsewhere, a spontaneous gathering formed by members of the surgical team and other hospital staff took shape in a quiet corridor that led to the doctor's lounge. Amid tentative apologies and reassurances, several junior doctors confessed their regret for having allowed bias to overshadow their immediate respect for a peer. "I can't believe we ever thought that man was simply an extra pair of hands," said one young resident, his voice approaching a choked whisper. "Today, witnessing him work, his precision, his calm under pressure, I feel we have been truly schooled in what it means to be a healer." His words lingered in the room, stirring a quiet promise that stereotypes would be challenged henceforth. Dr. Moore, having slipped away from the intense whirlwind of operating room heroics, sought a brief moment alone in a small, warmly lit office near the surgical wing. He sat at a modest desk, his white coat now unbuttoned and his expression reflective, marked by both the exhaustion of recent events and the satisfaction of a life preserved. The headlines from the day's tumult, now streaming in on televisions mounted on the wall, spoke of compassion triumphing over prejudice, of a black doctor who had been wrongly assigned a mop but who had, in a heartbeat, quelled a life-threatening crisis with brilliant resolve. Though a part of him still carried the sting of the earlier insults, that pain was now subsumed by the profound validation of his skills and the tangible ripple of change he had initiated. As twilight deepened outside and the rain finally receded into a gentle drizzle, the waiting rooms and corridors of St. Aurelius Medical Center exhaled a collective sigh of relief. In that patient, post-operative quiet, the hospital community understood that the true measure of a person was not in the superficial vestiges of appearance or the impermanent labels cast by bias, but in the indomitable spirit and unwavering dedication to healing. The public apology from leadership marked a turning point, one that promised to reform institutional culture, ensuring that, in the future, every member of the hospital would be recognized for their true contributions. In the reflective silence of that post-emergency calm, as grateful families clutched heartfelt thanks and colleagues embraced the lessons of humility, a new chapter began to unfold. Dr. Elijah Moore's journey had not ended with the successful surgery. It had only just transcended its painful beginnings. With the resounding support of a community now awakened to the true values of empathy and professionalism, he stepped forward into a future where every scar of injustice could be mended by the tender, yet unyielding, hands of dedication and respect. The day after the judge's ruling and the heartfelt public apology, the atmosphere within St. Aurelius Medical Center carried an almost reverent air, as if every heartbeat in its corridors had been recalibrated by the events of the previous hours. In the quiet morning light filtering through expansive windows, Dr. Elijah Moore stepped into the hospital's boardroom for an emergency meeting convened by the administration. His presence was no longer a subject of ridicule or dismissal. Instead, it was a beacon of hope and a symbol of true professional excellence. The board and department heads, along with representatives from the nursing staff and social services, gathered around a polished oak table, ready to discuss essential reforms inspired by the chaos and the profound lessons of that crisis. Dr. Moore took his seat with the calm dignity of a man who had weathered storms and emerged with an unyielding resolve. At the head of the table, Dr. Rosalind Carter, the hospital director, opened the meeting. Today, she began quietly but firmly, we must acknowledge a truth that was painfully clear to us all. Excellence in medicine transcends any superficial stereotype, and the events of yesterday have shown us that our institution must evolve, to not only deliver outstanding patient care but also to uphold unwavering respect for every member of our team. Her eyes met those of every staff member present, and for a moment the weight of unspoken apologies seemed to lighten the air. It was then that the board unanimously extended an invitation to Dr. Moore, a proposal to serve as the head of the newly established surgical integration program. His new role would not only recognize his extraordinary talent, but also empower him to mentor and guide a team that embraced diversity, compassion, and the highest standards of professionalism. Dr. Moore, Dr. Carter continued, your heroic actions and the undeniable value you have brought into our midst demand that we learn from you. We are formally offering you the opportunity to lead this program, to reform our protocols, and to serve as a liaison for all professionals who come to these halls with skills, not with prejudice. The room filled with an appreciative murmur, and even those who had earlier harbored biases now looked upon him with newfound respect. As Dr. Moore accepted the position, his voice steady as he said, I am honored to serve and to help redefine what excellence means here. The hospital's culture began its transformation almost instantly. Over the following weeks, a series of reforms was spearheaded by his office. New training sessions on diversity, inclusion, and empathetic patient care were instituted. A task force was created to ensure that every employee, regardless of their background, was celebrated for their talents and not judged by superficial external traits. In staff meetings held in bright, airy conference rooms, heartfelt discussions replaced the subtle cynicism of earlier times. Testimonials of colleagues who were once quick to judge turned into promises of change, and personal apologies were met with gracious smiles and the quiet strength of a man who had nothing left to prove, except his continuing commitment to saving lives. The transformation reached far beyond administrative memos. In the corridors of the hospital, innocent, tentative greetings replaced scornful glances. When a new intern or nurse joined the team, they were introduced with not only their qualifications but also an assurance that in this institution, every person's worth was measured by their contribution to healing. At one memorable hospital-wide assembly, a junior resident, tears glistening in his eyes with the realization of what he had once overlooked, stood before an attentive audience and said, I once believed that titles or appearances spoke louder than actions, but today, witnessing Dr. Moore's compassion and unwavering skill, I understand that true medicine is a craft of the heart as much as the mind. In his office overlooking the hospital gardens, a space that had been redecorated with inspirational quotes and images of resilience. Dr. Moore often found moments of quiet reflection. He recalled the bitter sting of the mop incident, the derisive whispers, and the hurtful laughter. Those memories, once sharp and persistent, had given way to the gentle solace of purpose. Each day, as he reviewed patient charts, mentored young doctors, or refined surgical procedures with his team, he reminded himself that the path to genuine healing is paved not in medals or accolades, but in relentless dedication to one's craft and an unyielding belief in the inherent worth of every person. Visitors to the hospital began to notice the change. The annual review, once a time for evaluating financial margins and patient turnover statistics, transformed into an occasion to celebrate stories of patient recovery, team collaboration, and personal triumph. Local media, once skeptical of the hospital's reputation, published glowing articles that highlighted how a single man's courage had altered not only one life, but the lives of an entire community of healthcare professionals. A new dawn, one headline read, "Where merit, compassion, and excellence illuminate every corner of our healing walls." On a bright morning a few months later, Dr. Moore, now dressed in a crisp white coat with gold embroidery denoting his new leadership role, attended a celebratory luncheon in the hospital's atrium. The room buzzed with genuine admiration. Former dismissive colleagues greeted him with sincere smiles and firm handshakes, and even patients, many of whom had recovered thanks to his interventions, shared quiet words of gratitude. Marissa, whose own journey toward healing had been profoundly affected by the man who had once been so misjudged, stood by his side. Together, they represented not only the triumph over prejudice, but also the promise of a tomorrow where compassion, competence, and respect reigned supreme. Dr. Elijah Moore's story, from being mistaken for a janitor to reclaiming a place at the pinnacle of medical leadership, had become a living testament to the transformative power of character and professionalism. In the bright, bustling corridors of St. Aurelius Medical Center, every staff member and patient now knew that the measure of a person was not skin deep. It was in the steady hands that saved lives, in the quiet courage that defied bias, and in the unspoken commitment to nurture others with empathy and excellence. Subscribe if you believe that true leadership is forged in the crucible of adversity, that enduring respect is earned by the heart and skill, and that real healing, in both body and society, begins with the courage to challenge bias and embrace our shared humanity.